In the year 644 CE, the most powerful man in the world woke before dawn, as he always did. He owned no palace, he wore patched clothes, and he walked alone through the streets of Medina, checking on his people. His name was Umar ibn al-Khattab, commander of the faithful, conqueror of empires, and the man who would die with only 17 dirhams to his name. But this is not just the story of a caliph. This is the story of a family, a daughter who defied him, a wife who challenged him, and children who carried his legacy into the very soul of Islam. Before we continue, you can check out the story of the first caliph, Abu Bakr, on our page. And kindly subscribe to our channel for more stories of the prophets and Sahaba. To understand Umar, you must first understand where he came from. The Mecca of the early 7th century was a place of extremes. Umar was born into the Banu Adi clan around 584 CE. His father, al-Khattab, was known for his harshness. He was an ambassador for the Quraysh, respected but feared. Unlike most Arabs of his time, Umar learned to read and write. He was a wrestler, towering and intimidating. But his greatest strength would prove to be something else entirely. His first marriage was to Zainab bint Madan, from a prominent family. Together, they had 3 children, Abdullah, Abdurrahman, and Hafsa. These weren't just children, each of them would play crucial roles in the preservation of Islam itself. But in those early days, no one could have imagined what was coming. Because in 610 CE, everything changed. A merchant named Muhammad began preaching a message that would tear Mecca apart. The sources describe Umar as terrifying in his opposition. He would torture his slaves if they converted to Islam. He became obsessed with stopping this movement. Then came the day that would change everything. The year was 616 CE. Umar set out to kill the Prophet Muhammad. He never made it. Cut to, Umar was stopped by a man in the street named Nurim Aym. Where are you going, Umar? Umar, to find Muhammad and end this madness. Nurim, perhaps you should check your own house first. Your sister has converted. Umar's face contorts with fury. He changes direction. What happened next is one of the most famous stories in Islamic history. Umar bursted into his sister Fatima's house. She and her husband said a reading Quran verses on parchment. Umar struck his sister. Blood ran down her face. But Fatima didn't back down. She looked at her brother and said, "Do what you will. We have accepted Islam." In that moment, something broke inside Umar ibn al-Khattab. He picks up the parchment and starts reading. Taha, we have not sent down the Quran to you to cause you distress. Umar's face transforms. Tears begin to fall. Hours later, Umar walked to the house where Muhammad was hiding. The Prophet's companions feared the worst. But when the door opened, Umar ibn al-Khattab, the fiercest enemy of Islam, fell to his knees. Umar, I testify there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Islam's greatest enemy had become its greatest defender, and with him came his family, a family that would shape the faith forever. After years of persecution, the Muslims migrated to Medina, and Umar's family faced a transformation as dramatic as his own. There's no how we will tell the story of Umar that we won't tell the story of her daughter, Hafsa. Meet Hafsa bint Umar, Umar's daughter, scholar, and the woman who would become the guardian of Islam's most sacred text. Hafsa was remarkable. In a time when few women were literate, she could read and write. Her father made sure of that, but Hafsa's story begins with heartbreak. She married young, to Qanais ibn Hudafar, one of the early Muslims. He fought at Badr, Islam's first major victory. At the Battle of Uhud in 625, Qanais was gravely wounded. Days later, he died, leaving Hafsa a widow at just 20 years old. Umar was devastated for his daughter. He approached Abu Bakr, asking if he would marry Hafsa. Abu Bakr said nothing. He then approached Uthman, whose wife had recently died. Uthman also declined. Umar was furious. How dare they reject his daughter? He confronted the Prophet Muhammad himself. Muhammad, smiling, and said, Hafsa shall marry one better than Uthman, and Uthman shall marry one better than Hafsa. Umar confused and asked, Who? Muhammad, I will marry Hafsa, and Uthman will marry my daughter Kulthum. Umar's face shows shock, then overwhelming emotion. In 625 CE, Hafsa bint Umar became the wife of the Prophet Muhammad. This wasn't just a political alliance. Hafsa became one of the Prophet's most trusted companions. She was known for her intelligence, her piety, and her strong will. She inherited her father's temperament. Once, she and Aisha, the Prophet's youngest wife, teamed up against him. Dr. Mahmud, chuckling, the Prophet was quite gentle in his domestic life. But these women were formidable. The Quran itself addresses a situation where Hafsa and Aisha formed an alliance that upset the Prophet so much, he considered divorcing them. But Hafsa's greatest contribution was yet to come. In 632 CE, the Prophet Muhammad died. The Muslim community was in crisis. The Quran had been revealed over 23 years, but it wasn't compiled into a single book. Parts of the Quran were memorized. Parts were written on stones, palm leaves, pieces of leather. After the Prophet's death, many of the memorizers were killed in battle. The text was in danger. Umar convinced Abu Bakr, the first caliph, to compile the Quran. A man named Zayd ibn Thabit led the effort. But where would they keep this sacred compilation? They entrusted it to Hafsa. For over a decade, Hafsa bint Umar was the keeper of the official Quran. When the third caliph, Uthman, needed to create standardized copies to send across the growing empire, he came to Hafsa. She gave it to them on the condition that they return it to her when they are done. Hafsa's copy became the source for all Qurans that followed. Every Quran in the world today traces back to the manuscript that was kept in her home. Think about that. A woman who lost her husband in battle, who remarried and became a scholar, was chosen to guard the actual words of God. That tells you something about both Hafsa and the community she lived in. Hafsa lived until 665 CE, dying in Medina at around 60 years old. She witnessed her father's entire caliphate and the tumultuous years that followed. But she wasn't Umar's only remarkable child. While Hafsa preserved the Quran, her brother Abdullah ibn Umar would become Islam's most trusted narrator of hadith, the sayings and actions of the Prophet. Abdullah ibn Umar was meticulous, careful. He spent his entire life trying to live exactly as the Prophet lived. Born around 614 CE, Abdullah was just a boy when his father converted to Islam. He grew up in the shadow of giants, his father Umar, the Prophet Muhammad, Abu Bakr, Ali. At 13, Abdullah begged to fight at the Battle of Uhud. The Prophet looked at the scrawny teenager and sent him home. At 14, he tried again at the Battle of the Trench. Again, too young, but at 15, the Prophet allowed him to fight at the Battle of Khaybar. Abdullah ibn Umar became a warrior, but his true battlefield was knowledge. After the Prophet's death, people came to Abdullah with questions. How did the Prophet pray? What did he eat? How did he treat his wives? Abdullah narrated over 2,600 hadith. Only 5 companions narrated more. But he had something they didn't: precision. Abdullah ibn Umar was known for his exactness. He wouldn't narrate a hadith unless he was absolutely certain. He would rather say, "I don't know," than guess. He inherited his father's integrity, but he did something his father never could: he stayed out of politics. In 634 CE, Abu Bakr lay dying. With his last breath, he named his successor, Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar reportedly said, "I wish I had been a tree that was cut down and eaten." Umar didn't want power, he wanted responsibility. There's a difference. When Umar became caliph, the Islamic State controlled Arabia. When he died 10 years later, it stretched from Egypt to Persia, from Yemen to the Caucasus Mountains. But Umar's true genius wasn't military, it was administrative. Umar created the first Islamic calendar. He established the Bayt al-Mal, the public treasury. He created the police force, the judicial system, welfare programs for the poor. He divided the empire into provinces, each with a governor, often one of his own family members, whom he held to brutal standards. Once, Umar publicly whipped his own son for drinking alcohol. Umar believed that power was a test from God. The closer someone was to him, the harder he was on them. Despite ruling an empire, Umar lived in a mud brick house. He wore patched clothes. He walked alone at night, checking on the needy. There was a famous story of Umar and a woman in the street. Umar, why are your children crying? Woman, not recognizing him, because they're hungry. I'm boiling water to trick them into thinking food is coming. Umar's face crumbles. Woman, Umar ibn al-Khattab will answer to God for us. Umar, whispering, and what if Umar didn't know? Woman, he is the ruler. It's his job to know. Umar immediately goes to the treasury, returns carrying a heavy sack of flour on his own back. His aide offered to carry it. Umar refused, saying, "Will you carry my burden on the day of judgment?" This is the paradox of Umar. He was harsh, uncompromising, sometimes terrifying. But he held himself to standards no one else could meet. His family knew both sides of him. Atika bint Zad, one of his wives, once challenged him when he tried to prevent women from attending the mosque. Atika, by Allah, I will go to the mosque. The Prophet never forbade us. Umar, frustrated, I know. But, Atika, then you cannot either. Umar falls silent, accepting her point. Umar's wives weren't passive. They argued with him, challenged him, held him accountable. This was a man who conquered empires but couldn't win every argument at home. But Umar's greatest test wasn't on the battlefield or in his home. It was yet to come. There's a story that when a delegation came from Persia to meet the powerful Caliph who'd defeated their empire, they found him sleeping under a tree with no guards. And the Persian general said, "You ruled with justice, so you slept in safety." He established the first welfare state in history. Pensions for the elderly, orphans, the disabled. He created the Islamic calendar, established the night prayer of Ramadan, organized the judiciary. But the real miracle wasn't the empire. It was the accountability. Umar once wore a garment that required more cloth than the stipend he gave citizens. A man challenged him publicly, "Where did you get the extra cloth?" Umar didn't have him arrested or silenced. His son stood up and explained he'd given his father his portion so he could have a proper garment. Only then did the man say, "Now we will listen to you." This is unprecedented, a ruler of an empire publicly accountable to any citizen. But there was a darkness brewing. With conquest came complexity. With power came enemies. Umar barely slept. He walked the streets at night, listening for anyone in need. Nobles complained that he made them live like paupers. The wealthy resented his equal distribution of spoils. There's a famous prayer where he said, "O God, I have become harsh for your sake, so be gentle with me. I have become stern toward your servants, so be compassionate with me." He knew he was feared, and it broke his heart. November 3, 644 CE. Fajr prayer, the pre-dawn prayer. Umar ibn al-Khattab stood to lead his community, as he had done thousands of times before. In the congregation stood a man named Abu Lu'lu'a Fares, a Persian slave, captured in the wars. He carried a grudge, and a poisoned dagger. As Umar bowed in prayer, Abu Lu'lu'a struck. He stabbed Umar 6 times. Umar fell, bleeding, but managed to grab a man next to him and push him forward to continue leading the prayer. Even dying, his first thought was the prayer. They carried him home. His wives gathered. His children rushed to his side. Hafsa wept. Abdullah held his father's hand. Umar, struggling to speak, placed my cheek on the earth. Perhaps God will have mercy on me. They lower him. His face touches the ground. Umar, how many lashes do I owe? Companion replied him, none. Commander of the faithful, you owe nothing. Umar loses consciousness. When he woke, his first question was, did the people complete the prayer? This is a man who had conquered half the known world. As he lay dying, he wasn't asking about his empire, his legacy, or his wealth. He asked if the people finished praying. Umar lived for 3 more days. He used that time to name a council to choose the next caliph, ensuring peaceful succession. Recreation. Umar with his council, Abdullah, Hafsa nearby. Umar told Abdullah not to seek leadership, but if it comes to him, he should not run from it either. He died on November 7, 644 CE. He was around 63 years old. His final request was to be buried next to the Prophet Muhammad and Abu Bakr. His daughter Hafsa gave permission for him to be buried in her home, where the Prophet lay. 3 graves side by side in Medina. Prophet, Abu Bakr, and Umar, the 3 who built Islam, rest together in Medina to this day. But the story doesn't end there. Today, over 1.8 billion Muslims live across every continent. They pray 5 times a day. They follow laws and principles established 14 centuries ago. And in those prayers, in those laws, in those principles, the family of Umar ibn al-Khattab lives on. Every time a Quran is recited, Hafsa's role is honored. Every time a hadith is quoted, Abdullah's scholarship is remembered. Umar's legacy isn't just in what he built, it's in how he built it, with justice, accountability, and an unwavering belief that power is service, not privilege. He was a man who terrified emperors but feared God, who conquered nations but couldn't conquer his own ego, who died with almost nothing but left everything behind. Umar ibn al-Khattab, the man who transformed from Islam's fiercest enemy to its most devoted guardian. The father who raised children who shaped history. The ruler who proved that power without justice is tyranny, and justice without courage is impossible. His empire crumbled, his children scattered, but his legacy, the legacy of the Iron Heart, endures. Kindly subscribe to the Muslim Millennium for more Islamic history, stories of the prophets, the Sahaba and more. Jazakumullahu khairan. Turn on post notification for next post.